this computer. All right, and now we're recording. I'm going to share my screen. Share. Okay. First thing we're going to do is irony. So, if it's a little loud, I'm sorry again. I'm going to do the best I can do. So irony. What is irony? Analyzing irony in literature. Isn't it ironic? And this is where I play the Alanis Morissette song, which you're probably like, who? What? I will play it after if we have time. But since we're running a little behind today, isn't it ironic? Don't you think? So I want you guys to look at these and I want you to tell me what is ironic about these. What's bizarre about them? Ironic is like the bizarre, like, oh, that's kind of punny, the punnies and the, so in this one, what's ironic?
It's a cemetery and it's a dead end.
Yes, it's a cemetery and it says dead end. All right, how about this one? Anson, how about this one?
What about it?
About this picture is funny. What's ironic about this picture?
Please knock hard on the door. Well, it's ironic because they said, please knock on the door. You can repair anything. Why won't they just repair the doorbell?
Yeah, exactly, right? They should just repair the doorbell. Okay. How about this one?
Is that, wait, did I say school?
What? I hear a lot of feedback and noise in your thing, Anson.
I'm with two people, so they looking at the picture too. They trying to figure out too.
Do you know what's wrong with it?
We have no idea.
So they're painting the word school.
They're like using letters to do it, and and it looks like the background looks like an empty lot, or like an empty something.
Yeah. The big thing is you spell school SCHOOL, not SH, so it's school. So that they're painting it and they don't know how to spell it. All right, this one's kind of funny, but not funny.
No, why they can't? They won't even be able to see the sign because one, it's white and it has like. First of all, wait, can blind people even see that? We even see that? Like if they just colorblind though.
Most people who are actually blind won't be able to see the sign.
Exactly.
This one's funny. This one's probably my favorite.
He's eating
both crocodiles. They both crocodiles. Crocs.
Right.
Crocs and crocs, right? A croc eating a croc. America Freedom, made in China.
Why is it? Wait, hold on. American Freedom, made in China. 4 out of 1 made in China.
So it's it's made in China.
If it's not American Freedom, it would not be made in China.
Yeah, exactly. It's American Freedom, but yeah, it's made in China. Okay, these images are ironic based on the images in your observations. So things you need to know is observations for irony. You have to observe and you have to infer. And we talked about inferences last class. So you're using what you know and the clues that are given, which is inference. And then using observations, you can guess what that word irony means. What is irony? Irony, wait, I gotta move you guys, hold on. Irony is the moment in a story where what happens next is the opposite is what is expected or considered. In other words, if you expect one thing to happen in a story, but you get something else totally unexpected instead, then you have irony. Irony can be classified as verbal, situational, or dramatic. So verbal irony is using words that mean something differently than how they're meant. In other words, sarcasm. And I know we can all be sarcastic. Situational irony is when you expect one thing to happen and something else completely different happens. And dramatic irony is when in a movie or a book, you are more aware of what's happening in the story than the characters. You know what's going to be behind that door that the character is about to open in the horror movie, you know, or in every horror movie, they go down in the basement. Like, why would you go down in the basement? And we always scream that, right? We're like, don't go in the basement, because we all know what's going to happen next. That's dramatic irony. All right, so we're gonna watch this clip, and we're just gonna look. I want you to I'm gonna show you some examples of irony, and I want you guys to really look. Is it dramatic? Is it situational? I want you to look. You don't have to take notes. I just want you to watch. I'm gonna ask you about it. Hopefully this plays.
Kate, no sound.
Oh, really? Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, but I wasn't sure.
All right, hold on. Stop share. Share screen. That's my bad. Let's try this again, guys. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna talk about it. Like you guys kind of know this one. So here's Monster Inc. You guys have probably seen this before.
All right, let's get a move on, people. We are on in 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Scary feet. Oh, the kid's awake. Ah!
Hey, you're a clownfish. You're funny, right? Hey, tell us a joke.
Yeah. I know one joke. There's a mollusk, see, and he walks up to a sea. Well, he doesn't walk up, he swims up. Well, actually, the mollusk isn't moving. He's in one place, and then the sea cucumber, well, I mixed up. There was a mollusk and a sea cucumber. None of them were walking.
All right, so let's talk about the first one, the Monsters Inc. So what is ironic about Monsters Inc?
Because they're supposed to be monsters, but the little girl scares them.
Yes, the little girl scares them. How about in Finding Nemo? What about Finding Nemo?
I wasn't too sure about that.
Okay, so clowns, right? Clowns are supposed to be funny and ha 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 and do jokes and make people laugh, right? And because he's a clownfish, it's assumed that he should be funny when in actuality, he's really not. All right, let's watch a few more. Sorry about the barking.
All my life, I've wanted to be one of them. You may think that's a strange dream for a rat, but I've always believed that with hard work and a little luck, it's only a matter of time before I'm discovered.
Run! Get some Do you know what would happen if anyone knew we had a rat in our kitchen? Go! Take it away from here, garbage boy!
One look and I knew we had the same crazy idea.
Okay. Huh?
Ratatouille. What's ironic about Ratatouille?
That the mouse is helping him cook.
Yes, the mouse is helping him to cook. What, Anson? You're breaking up a little bit.
I said like a whole mouse or rat, whatever you want to call it, it's helping each person cook and not one person is saying about it. And that's disgusting.
Exactly. So like, mice aren't supposed to be in the kitchen because they're rodents, right? And then this one is like a genius chef. Okay, so irony. We talked about the irony as we went on. All right, how do we analyze literature? So how do we, like, when we're reading, how do we find the irony? When analyzing irony in literature, you have to ask yourself some things. What is the ironic moment in the story? What is the type of irony is it? Is it verbal, situation, or dramatic? Why is the moment ironic? What did I expect to happen in the story? And how does irony impact the characters or the plot of the story? So like, sometimes you have to ask yourself, you're like, whoa, did that just happen? And like, sometimes it's a big pivotal moment and sometimes it's just ironic. And that's why it catches our attention. Because it's like the opposite of what we think is gonna happen. Talked about this, all right. So we're gonna practice. Now I'm gonna let you guys, it's gonna read to you and I'm gonna see if I can pop it up, but I want you to listen to this. It's short. So I want you guys today, we're gonna be reading this really short story. You don't have to annotate, I just want you to take a listen, if I can play it.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. After 20 Years by O. Henry. This reading by Dave Ranson. The policeman on the beat moved up the avenue impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show, for spectators were few. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night, but chilly gusts of wind with a taste of rain in them had well-nigh depeopled the streets. Trying doors as he went, twirling his club with many intricate and artful movements, turning now and then to cast his watchful eye down the Pacific thoroughfare, the officer, with his stalwart form and slight swagger, made a fine picture of a guardian of the peace. The vicinity was one that kept early hours. Now and then you might see the lights of a cigar store or of an all-night lunch counter, but the majority of the doors belonged to business places that had long since been closed. When about midway of a certain block, the policeman suddenly slowed his walk. In the doorway of a darkened hardware store, a man leaned, with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. "It's all right, officer," he said reassuringly. "I'm just waiting for a friend. It's an appointment made 20 years ago. Sounds a little funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I'll explain if you'd like to make certain it's all straight. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands, Big Joe Brady's restaurant. Until 5 years ago, said the policeman. It was torn down then." The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond, oddly set. 20 years ago tonight, said the man, I dined here at Big Joe Brady's with Jimmy Wells, my best chum and the finest chap in the world. He and I were raised here in New York, just like two brothers together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning I was to start for the West to make my fortune. You couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. Well, we agreed that night that we would meet here again exactly 20 years from that date and time, no matter what our conditions might be, or from what distance we might have to come. We figured that in 20 years, each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made whatever they were going to be. It sounds pretty interesting, said the policeman. Rather a long time between meets, though, it seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friends since you left? Well, yes, for a time we corresponded, said the other. But after a year or two, we lost track of each other. You see, the West is a pretty big proposition, and I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. But I know Jimmy will meet me here if he's alive, for he always was the truest, staunchest old chap in the world. He'll never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand in this door tonight, and it's worth it if my old partner turns up. The waiting man pulled out a handsome watch, the lids of it set with small diamonds. 3 minutes to 10, he announced. It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted here at the restaurant door. Did pretty well out west, didn't you? Asked the policeman. You bet. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a kind of plodder, though, good fellow as he was. I've had to compete with some of the sharpest wits going to get my pile. A man gets in a groove in New York. It takes the West to put a razor edge on him. The policeman twirled his club and took a step or two. I'll be on my way. Hope your friend comes around all right. Going to call time on him sharp? I should say not, said the other. I'll give him half an hour at least. If Jimmy is alive on Earth, he'll be here by that time. So long, officer. Good night, sir, said the policeman, passing on along his beat, trying doors as he went. There was now a fine cold drizzle falling, and the wind had risen from its uncertain puffs into a steady blow. The few foot passengers astir in that quarter hurried dismally and silently along with coat collars turned high and pocketed hands. And in the door of the hardware store, the man who had come 1,000 miles to fill an appointment, uncertain almost to absurdity, with the friend of his youth, smoked his cigar and waited. About 20 minutes he waited, and then a tall man in a long overcoat with collar turned up to his ears hurried across from the opposite side of the street. He went directly to the waiting man. Is that you, Bob? He asked doubtfully. Is that you, Jimmy Wells? Cried the man in the door. Bless my heart, exclaimed the new arrival, grasping both the other's hands with his own. It's Bob, sure as fate. I was certain I'd find you here if you were still in existence. Well, 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 20 years is a long time. The old restaurant's gone, Bob. I wish it had lasted so we could have had another dinner there. How has the West treated you, old man? Bully. It has given me everything I asked it for. You've changed lots, Jimmy. I never thought you were so tall by 2 or 3 inches. Oh, I grew a bit after I was 20. Doing well in New York, Jimmy? Moderately. I have a position in one of the city departments. Come on, Bob, we'll go around to a place I know of and have a good long talk about old times. The two men started up the street, arm in arm. The man from the West, his egotism enlarged by success, was beginning to outline the history of his career. The other, submerged in his overcoat, listened with interest. At the corner stood a drugstore, brilliant with electric lights. When they came into this glare, each of them turned simultaneously to gaze upon the other's face. The man from the West stopped suddenly and released his arm. You're not Jimmy Wells, he snapped. 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change a man's nose from a Roman to a pug. It sometimes changes a good man into a bad one, said the tall man. You've been under arrest for 10 minutes, Soaky Bob. Chicago thinks you may have dropped over our way and wires us she wants to have a chat with you. Going quietly, are you? That's sensible. Now, before we go on to the station, here's a note I was asked to hand you. You may read it here at the window. It's from Patrolman Wells. The man from the West unfolded the little piece of paper handed him. His hand was steady when he began to read, but it trembled a little by the time he had finished. The note was rather short. Bob, I was at the appointed place on time. When you struck the match to light your cigar, I saw it was the face of the man wanted in Chicago. Somehow I couldn't do it myself, so I went around and got a plainclothes man to do the job. Jimmy. End of After 20 Years by O. Henry.
Okay, so I know that was kind of long, and hopefully you didn't space out. So what was ironic in this story? What was the ironic part in this story? Anybody? Okay. So here's the short story. I'm going to show it to you guys. All right, so I want to highlight some things. So it talked about this, and I wish I could show it and play it because it won't let me do that. So you have the character, and he's walking through, and he's stopping at all the doors as he's walking, making sure all they're locked. People in this part of the city went home early. So you can kind of tell like what he does. Then a cop suddenly slowed his walk. Near the darkened shop, a man was standing. As the cop walked up to him, the man spoke quickly. "It's all right, officer. I'm waiting for a friend. 20 years ago, we agreed to meet here tonight. It sounds strange to you, doesn't it? I'll explain if you want to be sure that everything's all right. But after 20 years ago, there was a restaurant where this shop stands, Big Joe, Brady's restaurant." And then it goes on, 20 years ago tonight, I had dinner here with Jimmy Wells. He was my best friend and best fellow in the whole world. He and I grew up here together in New York, like two brothers. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. So it's between Jimmy and his name is Bob. The next morning I started for the West, and when I was going to find a job and make great success. You couldn't have pulled Jimmy out of New York, and he thought it was the only place on earth. We agreed that night that we'd meet up here again 20 years. So as the story goes on, he's continuing to tell the cop, and the man took out his watch, which was his fine watch, because he had made his money. He had found his riches. He found himself a good life, right? He was taking out his watch covered in fine jewels. So it talks about this. 3 minutes before 10. It was 10 that night when we said goodbye to each other by that restaurant door. And the guy was like, "Oh, you're successful, weren't you?" He's like, "Oh, yes, I surely was. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a slow mover. I've had to fight for my success. In New York, a man doesn't change much. In the West, you learn how to fight to get what you want." The cop took a step or two. "I'll go my way," he said, "and I hope your friend comes along tonight." "I'm not. I'll just wait a half an hour at least. If Jimmy is alive on Earth, he'll be here by that time. Good night, officer." And there was a cold rain falling, and as it goes on, he waited about 20 minutes, and a man came hurriedly. "Is that you, Bob?" And then he's like, "Oh, is that you, Jimmy?" The new man looked at the other man's hands. "It's Bob for sure. I was certain that I would find you here still alive. 20 is a long time. 20 years is a long time. An old restaurant is gone. Bob, I wish it was still here, and so we could have dinner. How has the West been good to you?" So they keep going and they talk, and you can tell as the story goes on that things happen. So the irony is, like, we hoped that Bob did as well as Jimmy, and then as it keeps going, it comes out and it says, "You're not Jimmy Wells. 20 years is a long time." What?
My tablet had died.
Oh, it's okay. "You're not Jimmy Wells. 20." The man from the West stopped suddenly and pulled his arm away. "You're not Jimmy Wells. 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change the shape of a man's nose. It sometimes changes a good man from a bad one," said the tall man. "You have been under arrest for 10 minutes, Bob. Chicago cops thought you might have been coming to New York. They told us to watch out for you. You were coming with me quietly. That's wise. But first, here is something I want to give you. You may read it here at the window. It's from a cop named Wells." The man from the West opened the little piece of paper in his hand. "Bob, I was at this place in time and I saw the face of a man wanted by Chicago cops. I didn't want to arrest you myself, so I went and got another cop and sent him to do the job, Jimmy." So what's the irony? What's the irony? Anybody?
Wait, so was the cop his friend, and then he had to go get another cop to arrest him because he didn't want to arrest his friend?
Yes. So it turns out that the guy, Bob, who was the one who went out west, he made himself a good life, blah, 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 blah. but turns out he was wanted by the Chicago police, right? And his friend Jimmy knew that he was wanted and came to meet him at that time and didn't want to arrest him, so he had another cop friend do it. So the irony is, yes, they did meet, but the fact is that, you know, all his fame and glory was actually because he was wanted, and he probably did some misdoings to get all that money and flashy stuff, right? So irony sometimes is a little hard to find. So you just have to kind of work and look at it from a bigger perspective. And sorry, there's like golf carts riding by. So it's a great example. So there's the movie. Do you guys want to see the movie? Yes or no? It's really quick. I'll show it if you guys want to see it. Do you want to see it? Mariah, do you want to see the movie? Hanson,
Sure.
you want to? Yeah? No?
Yeah.
It don't matter.
Okay.
It's a bit of a long story. 20 years long. It's all right, officer. I'm just waiting for a friend. It's a bit of a long story. 20 years long. Sounds a bit funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I'll explain if you'd like to make certain I'm all right. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands. Big Joe Brady's restaurant.
Until 5 years ago. They tore it down.
Oh. Well. 20 years ago tonight, I dined here at Big Joe Brady's with Jimmy Wells, my best friend and perhaps the finest man in the world. He and I were raised here in New York, just like two brothers, together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning, I was to start out for the West to make my fortune. You couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. Well, we agreed to meet here exactly 20 years from that date and time. No matter what our conditions might be, or from what distance we might have to come. We figured that in 20 years, each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made.
Sounds pretty interesting. Rather long time between meets, though. Seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friends since you left?
Well, yes. For a time, we corresponded. But after a year or two, we lost track of each other. See, the West is a pretty big proposition. And I kept hustling around over it. Pretty lively. But I know Jimmy will meet me here if he's alive. For he always was the truest, staunchest old chap in the world. He'll never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand in this door tonight.
And it's worth it if my old partner turns up. 3 minutes to 10. It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted here at the restaurant door.
Made your fortune out west then?
You bet. I hope Jimmy's done half as well. He was always kind of a plotter, though. Good fellow as he was. I've had to compete with some of the sharpest wits. Going to get my pile. A man gets in a groove in New York. It takes the West to put a razor edge on him.
Oh, I'll be on my way. Sure hope your friend comes around all right. Gonna call time on him sharp?
I should say not. I'll give him half an hour at least. If Jimmy's alive on Earth, he'll be here by that time. I'm sure of it. So long, officer.
Good night, sir.
Is that you, Bob?
Is that you? Jimmy Wells?
Bless my heart. That's Bob. Sure as fate. Yeah, I was certain I'd find you here if you were still in existence. Well, 20 years. It's a long time. Well, the old restaurant's gone, Bob. I wish it lasted so we could have had another dinner there. How's the West Street roll, man?
Bully. It has given me everything I asked it for. You've certainly changed lots, Jimmy. I never imagined you'd grow so tall in my absence.
Well, I grew a bit after I was 20. Thank you.
Doing well in New York, Jimmy?
Moderately. I have a position in one of the city departments. Say, come on, Bob. Let's go around to a place I know of. Have a good long talk about old times, huh?
There was this one smart fellow I met. A reporter. He had this little white dog. And a sailor friend. He was always nosing around.
That sounds quite interesting.
It was. Quite exciting, too. Always something new going on in Chicago. How's that city job of yours?
Well, it's a job. Someone's got to do it.
What is it you do? Hold it, buddy. You're not Jimmy Wells. 20 years is a long time. But not long enough to change a man's nose from a Roman to a pug.
Sometimes it changes a good man into a bad one. You've been under arrest for the last 10 minutes, Silky Bob. You know, Chicago thought you may have dropped over our way. They wired us. They want to have a little chat with you. Hey. Hey. Quietly. Be sensible. Now, before we go on to the station, there's a note I was asked to give you. You can read it here in the light. It's from Officer Wells.
Bob, I was at the appointed place on time. When you lit your cigar, I saw it was the face of a man wanted in Chicago. Somehow, I couldn't do it myself. So I went around and found a plainclothes man to do the job. Jimmy.
All right. So you got a better idea. We've talked about it. There it is. It's a great short story. It does show irony very well, just because, you know, he thought he was talking to his friend and it was a plainclothes cop and it wasn't. It was, you know. So the planet of irony. Irony is everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears. But what I want you guys to do, and I'm going to have a little fun, and let me stop share for a second. Okay, so hi, Najaquan, I didn't see you on. Welcome. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is I want you to use your phones or some sort of electronic device, whatever you got near you, really super quick. And I want you to go find an ironic meme. Go find a funny, ironic picture on your phone and show it to me. So you can Google irony memes, you can Google all sorts of different things, and you want to find ironic memes. And what I mean by that is go and like just show me. So here is one. Here is perfection, and it's not really perfection because it's ironic because the N is cut off, right? So go on your phones. If you're on your tablet, I want you to go and find me an irony meme. You can hit share screen if you are using the tablet and that's all you have. But I want you guys to go find one. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do it. Ready, set, go. And because I so promised you this, isn't it? Because of course I'm going to play. What do you got? Oh, I like it. Yep. Perfect. Thanks, Mariah. Najaquan, Anson. I want you guys to find me ironic picture. You don't have to show your face if you don't want to, but I just need to see your device with an ironic picture.
Wait, say that again. You were skipping.
Go. Sorry. I want you to go to on your phone or on this device, and you can share screen, and I'll make sure you guys can share your screen. But I want you to find a meme or a picture online that's ironic. So we've been talking about irony this whole time. I want you to go find a picture that is ironic, and I shared this one. This is mine, where it says, this is ironic because it's named Perfection is the name of the business, but the N is chopped off. And it's on a different building. So it's not perfect, right? That's irony. I'll go back to playing Alanis Morissette's Isn't It Ironic? It's like radio. Silly COVID won't let us see her. Just look on your phone, you got a couple more minutes.
I found one.
All right, you don't have to show your face, you just flip it on and just show me the picture. Or if you want to use it, you can share screen.
I'm about to show you right now.
Okay.
Wait, how do you flip the camera on here?
You hit start video, or if you want to hit participate, you put just share screen. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Where do you turn the camera? Oh, right here.
What's that say? Can you read it to us?
It says no posting signs on public property.
And they're posting a sign on public property. Love it.
Yeah.
Neshikon, how about you? Can you find me an ironic picture?
No.
Thank you, Anson. No? All right. I'll tell you what. I'm going to put my phone number in chat, and I want you to look for one, and you can text it to me. Deal? All right. Not that you guys should already have my phone number, but there it is. All right. So we are going to move on. I have a little bit time left, and if I get done with this, I'll let you guys go early. All right. Share career sound. All right. Down. All right, actually, I'm going to show you the one that I created really quick. I want to talk about carbs. Now, you guys, did you guys get the packet, the task argumentative essay? It should look like, let me scroll to the top. Did you guys get this? Hold on, whoa. Top, come on, scroll. Did you guys get this packet that says this? The task argumentative essay, writing as a process? Yes, no? Anybody get this packet? Do you guys have this packet? Guys, you're killing me. Come on, guys. Do you guys have this packet? It has like, it should be a big packet. It has, this is the title, writing as a process. It talks about, it has unpack, read, plan, response, edit. Do you have that packet? It's not one I handed you. Miss Sam should have gave it to you, or Miss Vanessa. Yes, no?
When did we supposed to get it?
Did you get it?
When was we supposed to?
A couple weeks ago.
I have not received anything.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to hold off on that then, and I'm going to talk to Miss Sam to see if we can make sure everybody gets one. So you're going to get this packet, and we're going to actually go through it again then. And I will hold off because I want you guys to like fill it in as we go. So I'm going to hold off on this because it actually talks about until we get the packet. I'll make sure Miss Sam gets it to you this week. It talks about carbs, and carbs is a way to look at your reading portions of your writing portion. So I'm actually going to skip that then, and I'm going to jump right into social studies. All right. So today's the last day that I'm going to do world history. Is there a lot of stuff that happens modern terms? Yes. We're going to talk about it really quick. I'm going to do it when I do my end of the year review, kind of end of the session review. I'm going to give you more like current, but I'm going to end at World War I, World War II for world history. Yes, there are more things, but for lack of time, because the bulk of your social studies test, besides the major world wars, is U.S. history. And I want to make sure, because we have like 6 weeks left, that I get you some U.S. history in, and I get you some economics, because both will be on your test. For 100%, both will be on your test. But World War I, World War II is. So I did record, I have it up on YouTube. If you don't know our YouTube, it is Seat Academics, or what is it? What is our YouTube channel, Mr. Jim? It's YouTube. If you're ever wondering, and yes, I'm slowly putting up the things. I've had really crappy reception. Academic seat at Gmail. It looks like this. If you put academic seat, you will come to our channel and you will see that we have some stuff up. I recorded the one session that I got done. I have a whole bunch of recordings to put up, but this way you can come here and you can just do the playlist. I'm going to organize them into classes, and Mr. Jim and I are working on putting these into, Mr. Jim will have some for math, some for science. I'll have some for English, some from social studies. So you get those separated sections out. But there's my class last week. You can come here and you can watch it. You can tell it's an hour and 39 minutes because Mr. Jim and I split the class. But okay, so let's talk about World War II. World War II was a big war. So what happened? We left off with World War I. World War I ended. Germany surrendered. It's called the Treaty of Versailles. And Germany was made to pay reparations. So basically, World War II was fought between the Axis powers, so Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Allied powers, Britain, United States, Soviet Union, and France. Most of the countries were involved in some sort of way. It was also the deadliest war in all of human history, killing around 70 million people. 70 million people got killed because of World War II. Well, it'd be like your great-grandparents, probably, like my grandfather has both fought in World War II. I'm sure Mr. Jim, it would be his parents. So depending on how old you are, a lot of people were either living through this or going through it, but both of my grandparents lived through World War II and fought in it or helped out one way or another. So World War II started in 1939. So Germany invaded Poland. Great Britain and France responded by declaring war on Germany. The war in Europe ended with Germany's surrender in May 7th, 1945. So there's two types of wars. So there's the war in Germany, the war over inland. So you have Germany invading Poland. Because basically, Germany was like, screw you, I'm not paying back reparations, and they get really, really, really upset, and they invade Poland. Even though they surrendered and said that they were not going to do any of that again. So everybody came to Poland's aid. So you have that war going on. We fought in that war too. You also have the war in the Pacific, where, and I'm going to show you a video and it's going to really explain a lot of this, but Japan went to war because Japan is an island and they're like, hey, we want land. We need resources. We need land. We want stuff. And so Japan started invading all of its surrounding places. And we were like, no, because we had landhold over there. And we said no. And we went to war over there too. So there were two different wars. So we talked about the Treaty of Versailles. At the end of the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I between Germany and the Allied powers. Because Germany had lost the war, the treaty was very harsh against Germany. Germany was forced to accept the responsibility of the war damages suffered by the Allies. The treaty required that Germany pay back huge sums of money. And anytime you have to pay back something, it's called reparations, right? So just think, everybody say reparations. Say reparations, pay back money. Reparations, pay back money. If you keep saying that out loud and you say it a couple times, you're gonna remember that term. Reparations, you got to pay back the money. The problem with the treaty is that it left Germany's economy in ruins. So people in Germany were like starving. The economy was crap. The government was in chaos, and so Germany's like, no. And so they went to war to get some more. They wanted, again, it's usually wars are fought because of money, they're fought because of resources, and because of power. Germany wanted all three. Japan. So there's the land issue, right? There's Germany going to war with people, again, because of that's the land part of it. Japan. In a period before World War II, Japan was rapidly growing, right? Japan is huge, with a lot of people in it. However, it's an island nation. Just like I said, they do not have the land or the natural resources to sustain them. They kind of still don't. That's why we have export imports. Japan began to look to grow their empire and gain new resources. So they invaded Manchuria in 1931 and then China in 1937. So there are the two wars inside World War II. So there's two wars being fought. and just think World War II, there's 2 wars, and it's the Second World War. With the economic turmoil left behind of World War I, some countries were taken over by dictators. So here's what happens when you're like, oh, why would they listen to all that, right? We're going to talk about Hitler in a minute, and people are like, why? I don't understand how people can get in line with people that are dictators, right? Just think, what dictators do, they offer shiny happiness in bleak moments, right? So that's the best way I can describe how dictators take over. So you have a world everybody's pretty much poor. You have economic, like everything is down. You have loss of jobs. You have things shutting down. Everything is like utter chaos. And then all of a sudden you have this like bright and shiny light bulb, and people are going to be, it's like flies attracted to light. People go to the light and they think that's a great thing. Sometimes, and dictators lie, so they're going to have these things. And then what happens is that the dictators come over and they start forming these governments, and people just kind of get in line because they're like, oh, well, maybe what we did before doesn't work, so let's try this, right? And then they end up with dictator governments or fascist governments. These dictators wanted to expand their empires and they're looking for new lands to conquer. The first fascist government was Italy, which is ruled by a dictator named Mussolini. Then Italy invaded and took over Ethiopia. Next was Adolf Hitler. Most of you know who he is. He is the head of the Nazi Party, and he would emulate his dictatorship. Sorry, hold on. He would emulate his dictatorship to emulate Mussolini, and he eventually took over Germany. In Spain, you have a dictator named Franco. Hitler and the Nazi Party. So in Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. The Germans were desperate for somebody to turn around their economy and restore their national pride. Hitler offered them hope, that bright and shiny light bulb, right? So in 1934, Hitler was proclaimed the Führer, or leader, and became dictator of Germany. Hitler resented the restriction put on Germany because of the Treaty of Versailles. While talking about peace, Hitler began to rearm Germany. He allied with Mussolini over in Italy, and then he looked to restore Germany's power by expanding his empire. First, he took over Austria. So if you remember, Austria-Hungary went to war because of Archduke Ferdinand. Eventually, Germany took over Austria. When the League of Nations did nothing to stop him, basically the League of Nations were like, hey, don't do that again, okay? We see what you did, don't do that again. And gave him a little slap on the wrist. And what did Hitler do? Hitler ignored them, because that's what Hitler does, and he took over Czechoslovakia in 1939. So basically, he wanted power. He wanted economic stability, and in Japan, they wanted resources and power. So as you go through on, you'll see that basically the appeasement is just like keeping peace. Everybody wanted the keeping peace. Basically, what Hitler was like, nah, I don't want to keep the peace. And so he took over things. World War II also, we're not talking about economics yet, but in World War II, you have the period right before World War II was huge, great economic suffering called the Great Depression. And it wasn't just in America, it was kind of like throughout Europe too. So you have like all the costs of the war. You have people coming home from the war, and there's not enough, like all the jobs have been like repurposed, right? Because all these men were at the war. Same is going to happen. So you have a lot of economic stability turmoiling through the world at this time. I just want you to make sure that you know, because you're going to talk about the Great Depression when we get to economics, but know that it's not just a U.S. thing, because we did go through the Great Depression, but it's also in the world. Okay, so here are pictures of the war. So this is over in Japan. This is the streets. Yes, those are bodies. I found the most realistic pictures I could find because I want you to see how like this devastating this war was. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears. We talked about Germany and Adolf Hitler, and we're gonna switch gears. Now we're gonna talk about the Japan side of things, the war over in the Pacific coast. So there's this thing that happened called Pearl Harbor. Now Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, 1941, right? Japanese airplanes made a surprise attack on the U.S. Navy base in Pearl Harbor. They destroyed many ships, killed many soldiers. It was an attack that forced the United States to enter World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor came as a complete surprise. We weren't expecting it at that time. It was a bright and sunny day. If you've ever seen the movie, that part's kind of accurate. Hundreds of Japanese fighter planes and bombers flew to Pearl Harbor and attacked. The bombers dropped bombs and torpedoes on the warships, while fighter planes attacked the U.S. fighter planes on the ground so that they could not take off and fight back. There were 2 waves of attacks, and by the end of the second wave, a number of U.S. ships were destroyed. So they're attacking our ships, they're attacking our planes so we can't fight back, and they made another wave and just destroyed as much as they humanly could. Okay, and these are pictures from Pearl Harbor. Okay, so now we're going to talk about something heavy. The Holocaust. So the Holocaust was one of the most terrible events in human history. It occurred during World War II when Hitler was the leader of Germany. 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis. This included as many as 1 million Jewish children. Many millions of other people that Adolf Hitler did not like were also killed. This included Polish people, Catholic people, Serbs, and handicapped people. It is thought that the Nazis murdered as many as 17 million innocent people. Hitler hated Jewish people and blamed them for losing World War I. He considered the Jewish people less than human. Hitler also believed in the superiority of the Aryan race, so blonde hair, blue eye. Okay, so blonde hair, blue eye was the goal. And of course, he was not blonde hair, blue eye. He wanted to use Darwinism, so like, Darwinism is like the perfect person, and then if you breed with perfect people, you get perfect people eventually. And so that was like his idea thought, right? So here we got science mixing in with our class today. Hitler wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which is horrible, and it's not just because Hitler wrote it, but it's because Hitler wrote it because he was a horrible author. He could not write very well. The German to English translation is horrible. I have had to read it for class. It was a painful read, but it's something that, you know, if you do have time and you are interested in history, you possibly should read, even though it's horrible, because he wrote it. Not many people believe that he would really do anything that was in Mein Kampf, but as soon as he became chancellor, he started his work against the Jews. He made laws that said Jewish people had no rights, and then he organized attacks on the Jewish businesses and homes. On November 9th, 1938, many Jewish homes and businesses were burnt down or vandalized. This was called the Night of the Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht. So that was one major night that was very scary because a lot of things got burnt down. So what would happen is that he started to take over the city in Europe and force all the Jewish people into one area of town. So what they did is there was this area of town, and like basically they moved all the people out of it except for the Jewish people and forced all the Jewish people into one spot. This is called the ghettos. This is where that term comes from. So when you hear the term, no, it comes from this era. So basically what they did is they forced them into these locations, and they had no choice. They were forced into these locations, and they, whatever they had on them going to it, that's all they had. So there was little food, little water, and hardly no medicines available, because whatever was in that area was all they got. They really didn't get food. Again, they were trying to get them to be considered less than human, right? So you have multiple family sharing rooms, not just some, but you had multiple families sharing like 2-bedroom apartments, right? You'd have a single room and you'd have 3 families living in a single room, just to show you like how many people were there. And of course, you know what happens if, like, back then the toilet systems weren't as advanced as they are today. Yeah, it was really horrible. And I touched that, so I need to touch. So here is an example. Here are Jewish people being during the night of the broken glass, and right before they moved all those families into the ghetto. What they did is they put them into this big giant, I'm trying to think of like a building. Think of Schenectady Gymnasium, right? All right, let's use that. So or Albany, even Albany Gymnasium. Think of whatever high school gymnasium you have. Now think of like thousands of people being shoved in there because of what they believed in, right? That's where they were forced to stay. They were in there for a little bit until they got the ghettos organized. So they were in there, I want to say it was like 7 to 14 days. You had no bathrooms, no nothing, right? It was a very scary time. They, like, whatever they had on their backs, they were told to take and go. And they're forced into that like gymnasium arena kind of warehouse during the night of the broken glass. These are a picture over here. You can see where you see all these lines of housing. This is the picture of the ghettos. They were separated by barbed wire. And here is the march where you start to see them starting to go onto trains. So let's talk about the trains. All right, so we have concentration camps, and that's what most people think, Adolf Hitler and concentration camps. There was a lot that happened up until then, right? You had putting people into the ghetto. And then they started like, okay, let's get them out of the city and let's put them into someplace else. And so they started building these concentration camps. So what they told the Jewish people is it would be better than the ghettos, and we're going to relocate you to a better place, which definitely was not the case, right? Concentration camps were like prison camps. People were forced to do hard labor, build new buildings. They were forced to put railroad stations in and build railroads. They were forced to do a lot of things. The weak were killed off, or died of starvation. And then not all of the camps, but most of the camps, even towards the end, started having gas chambers. So what would happen is you get off the train and they'd separate you women and the children. They'd march the children off and pretty much killed most of the children. They would go through the women and picked the most hardiest ones that could do manual labor, like sorting clothes and boots, and I'll show you in a minute, sorting items, or cooking. And then most of the men were kept if you were healthy. If you were not, if you were elderly, you were killed. And what they would do is, if you can see these little cone shapes right here, what they would do is they'd drop the gas in and they would like take them into these places. They'd either pretend like they were showers, or they would pretend that they were going into a shower, and it wasn't. It was these gas chambers, and the gas would come down through these pipes, down these cobes, and kill millions of people that were in there. So as you can see, and these are pictures actually from concentration camps. So here is a picture of shoes. You see the women here sorting the shoes from good from bad, to give to men as they were working. Shoes are being repurposed and reused. Here's these are piles of clothes of people who have been perished. You were stripped of clothes and shoes, and you were given a uniform, so to speak. You were giving your food dish, which most people, as you can see, used as pillows. You're giving a small blanket, and these were the barracks. So you can see all these men sleeping in these little tiny cramped quarters, right? And they look emaciated because they didn't get a lot of food. They were, again, just considered to be workhorses, and they weren't fed food. So here are the gas chambers. So here are the incinerators. So after they got an idea, instead of burying mass bodies, that they would just burn them. It would be easier. So some nights that you would see, some days, the cloud thickness was so thick of ash that it felt like snow, but it wasn't snow, it was human ash. So like in concentration camps, like survivors would say, oh, it was snowing that day, but like that, like them trying to ignore the fact that it wasn't really, like they didn't know that it really wasn't snow, it was human ash falling from the sky because they were burning so many bodies at once, right? Then you have death trains, and these are the death trains. I wish I could find the picture from my grandfather because he was in one of the groups that found one of the death trains, and it's the only time he ever talked about it, because he was with the correspondents that did newspaper articles and photography. They came across a death train that had been vacated, and basically they opened it up, and it was just chock full of hundreds and hundreds. One railroad car was chock full of hundreds of bodies. So what they would do is, if you look at these, and most of these death cars, they would just put as many people in as humanly they could fit, shut the doors, and it was pretty airtight. They didn't have a lot of room to breathe. There was no windows. You had lots of panicking, and when people start panicking, they start to breathe heavy. And when you don't have a lot of air circulation, and you have a lot of 100 people in the cars, and you have all these bodies and no air, you start to produce way too much carbon dioxide, and you start killing people because they can't breathe. You start suffocating people, and that's what happened. The majority of the people would arrive in these cars, and they would be dead. And some of these trains were designed purposely to do that. So they would, before they would even get to the concentration camps, they would already had killed off many, many, many people, right? Yeah. So I know that's a little bit of a downer, but that was the reality of World War II. Part of also the reality of World War II in many wars was rationing. Rationing was a huge thing. Because the wars, many products were in short supply. Metal had to be used to make tanks and battleships. Medicine was actually needed for the battlefields. So medicine on land was really hard to come by. Also, products were hard to get that had come from different countries that were at war. So rubber for tires was hard to get because we imported a lot of our rubber. By the end of the war, many products were rationed. Each family would get ration stamps allowing them to buy a certain food and an amount of a type of product. Just like when we went into COVID and like everybody bought toilet paper, right? And then they started rationing out the toilet paper for like one bundle per person. That's the same concept, right? It's like too many people needed something, not enough supply, then they started rationing. So that's like as relevant as we can get. But just imagine not being able to get like sugar, meats, butter, coal, and back then coal was the major source of heat. You would use coal to heat your house. Automobiles, tires, get metal, anything, gas, right? So you have World War. So this is an example. This is an experiment. So this is kind of an example of what a weekly ration would be for one adult. I'll say that again, weekly for one adult. So you have 2 to 3 pints of milk, 8 ounces of sugar, 1 egg, 2 ounces of cheese, or 4 ounces for vegetarians. They get the eggs. 2 ounces of tea, which equals about 25 tea bags. You get 4 ounces of margarine. You get 4 ounces of cooking fat, so lard, or 2 ounces of butter. 2 ounces. It's like not a lot. You get 1 pound of preserve every 2 months, 4 ounces of bacon or ham, a meat, which is worth like, you get like probably like a couple pounds of meat. Oops, sorry. You get 12 ounces of sweet every 4 weeks. 12 ounces of sweets every 4 weeks. So rationing was really crazy, but this is this is a great example of like what it would actually look like to have a ration. So if you're looking, I know a lot of you are culinary, I challenge you to look up some 1930s rationing cookbooks, because they got really creative with like very little items. So if you're ever like in a pinch and looking for something really different, those rationing cookbooks, and I have a couple, they're really, really interesting to read and interesting to try, because they used a lot of like different ingredients to try to make different things to make it taste better, right? Because they didn't have a lot of stuff, especially when you're only out loud 1 week of 8-ounce sugar. I mean, that's like hardly anything. World War II also seen this thing called women going to work. So you have all these men away. You have all these jobs, right? We have all these jobs, knowing to fill them, so men went to work. I didn't set my alarm, so I just got to make sure of the time. Okay. When World War II began in 1939, around 190,000 men in the U.S. Army. By the time the world ended in 1945, there were 10 million in the war. So you have all these factories trying to make trying to make guns, trying to make ships and tanks and vehicles for the war, but there was no workers. So to fill the gap, many women went to work. They took rough physical labor jobs that previously mostly done by men. Women who went to factory were named Rosie the Riveter. So if you've ever seen, you'll see a propaganda poster and you'll see this girl with her showing her muscles, and she's got like a handkerchief on and she's got overalls on. That's Rosie the Riveter. And that's what the women who went to work, they built most of the planes, tanks, and ammunition and guns that were for the war. So you can see here, this girl is checking to see if the missile, like the mortars are good. You can see over here, they're showing how to work, and girls looking on so they know what they're doing when they're fixing an automobile. You can just see the assemblies through here. So here's a woman checking bombs, and she's looking to make sure that they're okay and that they're on tight. So another thing that happened, and I think it's called Field of Dreams, I'm pretty sure it's called Field of Dreams, where you have Women's League of Baseball. Because here in America, what we love most is our sports. We love our sports very, very much. So what happened is, since we had no men to do our sports, the women took over. So we have Women's League Baseball. So baseball is our great American pastime, right? So women started forming these leagues and started playing baseball, so we can give the people who are still home some joy and fulfillment. As we're moving on, we have Japanese Americans. So here in America, of course, we are the melting pot of the world. We have many, 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 many cultures into one, and that included Japanese descent Americans. They were here legally. They had already immigrated from Japan here. But what happened is that we went to war with Japan. And so you have all these Japanese Americans hating Japanese people because we were at war with Japan. Same kind of happened, but not in a big way, but same thing happened after 9/11, right? You have people of Middle Eastern descent and people being very weary of them. It's not in the same level, because what happened is around 100,000 to 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps. They had to leave their homes, shops, and jobs. Many of them lost their possessions, right? And we forced them into camps. Sound familiar? Oh, because Adolf Hitler put them into concentration camps. We just labeled it internment camps. We did feed them as much as we could. We fed them well. It was more like a prison camp, but like a friendly prison camp. But they still lost most of their homes, most of their jobs, most of all their possessions. And so this happened in 1942, right? 1942 is when we forced Japanese to go into internment camps. In 1988, so 40 plus years later, Ronald Reagan signed a bill that gave reparations, aka payments, right? Reparations just means payments, of $20,000 to each survivor. That's all they got. They lost their stuff back in 1942, but 40 years later, we're going to give them $20,000 as reparations. And then you have a year later, George H.W. Bush, and I remember this happening. Like I remember this being on the news. So they were forced to give, that America was going to give them $20,000, and I was trying to figure out why, until my father told me, because I was of this area. Then George W. Bush said, "Hey, I'm sorry," as a formal apology. 40 years later. It's still very absurd to even think about that. It took us 40 years to say we're sorry. All right, so in Europe, and they still very much, they call it Victory Day nowadays. They just call it Victory Day. They don't call it Victory in Europe Day or VE Day. They just call it Victory Day in Europe today. But for us in America, we call it VED, or Victory in Europe Day. This is when the day that they celebrated the formal acceptance of the Allies of World War II of the Nazi Germany having an unconditional surrender of its armed forces on May 8th, 1945. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi leader, committed suicide during the Battle of Berlin. So we did not kill Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler went out on his own terms, which many things is an injustice. Or then, the conspiracy theories that say he didn't, and he lived under a pseudonym, blah, 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 blah. But there's always conspiracy theories. So this is the Arc de Triomphe over in France. I want to say this is down towards Germany. VE Day was a huge, huge, huge deal. And that is the end of the slideshow. Okay, so what I want you guys to do, I do have a minute, and I'm going to give you the choice. There is a short video that shows the first part. We don't have time for both, but I want to at least show you the first part, or we can end class early and you guys can go watch it on your own. Which would you like? But if I let you out early, the next thing you're going to do is look up World War II oversimplified. Do you want to watch the first part? We have the time. I'm giving you an option. Somebody respond. Are we still here? Hello? Am I talking to myself?
I'm here, Miss Kate.
I don't think anybody else is. Mariah, are you there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna show the first one. At least that way it's on record. It's not gonna take 15 minutes. I'll let you go after this, and I'm gonna have you guys watch the part 2 by yourself. Let me just get to this point where I can skip this. 3, 2, 1, skip. Okay, here we go. We're gonna watch the first part, and I'm gonna let you guys watch the second part.
Are you tired of the media spinning the truth and pushing false narratives? Well, take a look at this. Over the last 3 years, while the...
This video was made possible by Skillshare.
Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly, he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe he could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare, an online learning community with more than 19,000 classes in design, business, technology, and more. Perhaps he was considering a side career in fashion, but didn't know where to start. On Skillshare, he would find courses in fashion design and garment construction. Or if he wanted to learn app design, improve his photography, or just how to make a really good quesadilla, he would have found courses for all of these and more on Skillshare. Skillshare gives you access to high-quality classes taught by genuine experts working in their field. I work heavily with animation, and I was genuinely blown away by the number of really useful courses available to me, like this class full of tips and tricks for creating vector art, or this one for creating character walk cycles.
Yeah, we're gonna skip Skillshare.
Be sure to try it out. It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold. Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army. Fair.
Trouble hearing? Don't skip this video. If you're suffering from premature hearing loss, the struggle could soon be over.
Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat.
This is a tomato.
Yes,
Think it's good for you? Think again.
In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you what... Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future. Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, How about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your amphibians? But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the phony war, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended, because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. While the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that.
Okay, and I'm gonna end it there. I want you guys to go watch the second part of this, because I think it really Oversimplified does a really great job of like summing everything up. I want you guys to be able to see it. Najikwan, you still owe me a meme that is ironic. I won't forget. Don't make me go get your number and text you later, because I will. So send it to me. Anyways, with that, it is 12:12. I'm gonna let you guys go for the day. And I hope you guys have a great afternoon. Try to stay cool. I hope it's not as hot there as it is here, but I have a feeling it's just as hot there. I'm not that far from you. I'm only towards Saratoga. So you guys have an amazing part of your day, and I will catch you guys tomorrow. Okay?
Have a good day, camping.
Bye. Have a great day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.